Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Doctor, don't drink this coffee. The head doctor put something in it, whispered the orderly in the cafeteria. After swapping cups, the surgeon turned pale as the events unfolded. Doctor, don't drink this coffee. The head doctor put something in it, came the quiet, desperate whisper behind the surgeon, just as he was bringing the cup to his lips, preparing to take the first sip. The 27-year-old orderly Isabel, small and thin, with a worried expression and wide, anxious eyes, stopped right at his shoulder. She held the tray as though it were her only shield against possible danger. From the very start, her appearance clearly signaled that something was wrong. She was trying to warn him of the looming threat. Diego Antonio, the 35-year-old surgeon, immediately felt a cold chill in his chest, as if he had suddenly found himself on the brink of disaster. He knew that Isabel was a responsible young woman, with a touch of irony in her character, but never prone to empty panic. Something in her face, specifically the terror in her eyes, convinced him to take her words seriously, even though they sounded completely unbelievable. The head doctor, a man with an impeccable reputation, at least on the surface, had put something in the coffee. It sounded like a wild fantasy. And yet, Diego noticed that Isabel's lips were trembling slightly, and it didn't seem like a joke. The morning in the hospital cafeteria was proceeding as usual, the hustle and bustle, people in white coats and green surgical block uniforms, tired shift workers hurrying to finish their coffee before heading home, and the energetic newcomers busy discussing patients. The familiar work atmosphere filled the room, but everything seemed to fade away the moment Isabel spoke. "What did you say?" Diego asked cautiously, trying to keep his voice steady, devoid of panic, while slowly placing the cup back on the table. "I saw," she whispered, trying not to attract any eavesdroppers. "Dr. Raphael came to your table and poured something from a small packet. It looked like powder. Please, don't drink it." Isabel nervously swallowed and looked around. At the far end of the cafeteria, nurses were discussing the duty schedule, several doctors with coffee cups in hand stood by the serving counter, and some people were having a slow breakfast before their shift, dragging their chairs across the tiled floor. No one was paying much attention to their conversation. This was for the best, because if things were as bad as Isabel said, making loud statements would certainly not be a good idea. Dios mío, Diego exhaled quietly, quickly thinking about what to do. He wasn't inclined to paranoia, but after many years of working in the hospital, he'd seen all kinds of intrigue and conflicts within the staff. Real attempts on someone's life seemed out of the ordinary, but who knew what people were capable of when it came to large amounts of money, power, or personal gain? After all, just recently, at one of the meetings, he'd asked uncomfortable questions about new supplies of surgical instruments. Back then, Dr. Rafael Mendoza, the head doctor, had looked at him with clear disapproval. "Do you doubt the correctness of my decisions and those of the team handling the purchases?" he had said in front of everyone, and Diego had noted that the head doctor's gaze hadn't been very friendly even then. "I understand. Thank you for the warning," Diego replied quietly, leaning toward Isabel, trying not to show his confusion. In that very moment, he made an impulsive, possibly reckless decision. He swapped his cup with another one standing nearby. This was Isabel's cup, also with coffee, but seemingly without sugar, because she had just been about to go to the table and add sugar there. "Doctor," she gasped, seeing what he was doing. I want to understand what exactly is in there," he whispered, fully aware of the risk. "After all, if we want to expose him, we'll need evidence. At least to send for analysis." He carefully moved the cup closer to him but had no intention of drinking from it. "We need to find a lab where we can do an anonymous test, or at least take it to a toxicology center. But we need to do this discreetly." "Está loco," Isabel muttered. "All right, fine. I'm with you." She realized that she had saved him from taking a sip, and now he was making a bold move. The orderly quickly figured out that they needed to check whether any traces of powder remained at the bottom of the cup or at least keep the drink. But at that moment, Dr. Raphael confidently returned to the cafeteria. He saw Diego and Isabel standing together, whispering. The head doctor walked straight toward them, trying to appear calm, but his gaze slipped to Diego's cup. "Ah, Dr. Diego," Dr. Rafael Mendoza spoke quietly. "Are you ready for breakfast or perhaps lunch after your shift? How was the night?" Diego felt his insides twist. He forced himself to smile calmly. "Yes, I decided to have a coffee before the surgeries. You know, we have a complicated patient. I'll be in the OR in an hour." "Excellent," the head doctor nodded, looking around the table. "And is Isabel helping you with something?" The orderly wanted to answer that she had just brought the tray, but barely managed to say politely, "Yes, Dr. Rafael, everything's fine." Diego noticed that the head doctor was looking at the cup, as if trying to figure out whether he had drunk from it or not. A strange grimace of disappointment passed across Dr. Rafael's face, which was quickly replaced by a friendly smile. "Well, I won't disturb you," he said, slightly tilting his head. "I have a meeting. Dr. Diego, come see me when you're free. I have a work-related matter." The surgeon nodded briefly. The head doctor walked away. Inside, Diego felt anxiety tightening his chest. Isabel also turned pale and retreated to the window, pretending to sort cups on the tray. "What do we do now?" she whispered, trying not to look at the doctor. "Maybe we should take the cup to the lab before anyone has a chance to clean it." "Let's go," he exhaled. "But let's be quiet." They didn't continue their breakfast scene. Diego picked up the cup, carefully carrying it toward the exit of the cafeteria. Isabel walked behind him, trying to shield the situation from the curious eyes of colleagues. But, unfortunately, just by the door, they were blocked by the janitor, who decided to clean the floors at that moment. They had to stop, and just in a few moments, someone, perhaps on the head doctor's orders or by pure coincidence, called Isabel from the back of the cafeteria, asking for help. When she returned, Diego was already standing empty-handed. "Where's the coffee?" she asked quietly. "Damn," he muttered. "I just left the cafeteria and bumped into the head of the surgical department. He started talking to me about the patient. I put the cup on the windowsill, meant to pick it up in a minute, but when I turned around, it was gone. Maybe someone took it for washing, or one of the nurses thought it was abandoned." "It's gone," Isabel grabbed her head. "Now we don't even have the cup." "Quiet, quiet," Diego reassured her, looking around. "Well, that's that. We can't prove anything anyway. But we need to stay alert. He might try again. And I don't believe he will back off just like that." The orderly nodded anxiously, trying to breathe deeply to calm herself. The mere thought that someone might seriously try to poison the doctor seemed insane to her. But she had seen the head doctor's suspicious behavior herself. "All right," she said. "Since we don't have the cup, we can just be more cautious. And later, you can talk to someone you trust. Maybe get advice?" Diego thought about whether there was anyone among his colleagues who wouldn't be afraid to stand up to the head doctor. Maybe the anesthesiologist, with whom he had discussed a few things in the past and who had hinted that something wasn't right with the finances. Or Dr. Carmen, the intensive care specialist, with her strong principles. But revealing the secret so soon was dangerous. They had to be sure of their allies. "We'll see," he replied. "I have surgery now. There's a patient with a serious stomach condition. We'll think about it later." He glanced quickly at his watch. "I need to hurry and change." Isabel nodded, understanding that Diego's main duty now was to be ready to save lives. But fear gnawed at her from the inside. Soon, the surgeon was standing in the operating room, in his green scrubs, cap, and mask, ready for the resection of the affected part of the stomach. The team, including several assistants and the anesthesiologist, was preparing for the procedure. Diego knew that in the operating room, he needed to push all unnecessary thoughts aside. The patient, a 50-year-old woman, could have her life saved if the surgery went without complications. "Listos," he spoke quietly to the anesthesiologist, Dr. Miguel Angel, an old colleague, and the assistants. They confirmed their readiness. In the operating room, soft background music played, usually helping maintain concentration. Under Diego's clear guidance, the surgery began. His confident scalpel movements, steady voice giving commands, and ability to quickly respond when the patient began to bleed, everything about him spoke to his high professionalism. His colleagues noticed that despite the stressful night and the recent shock in the cafeteria, he maintained complete focus. For several hours, Diego immersed himself in the world of surgical work, cuts, suturing blood vessels, carefully removing pathological tissue, thorough checks with clamps and tampons. Sweat poured down his forehead, but the operating nurse, accustomed to it, handed him tissues to wipe it away. The anesthesiologist kept track of blood pressure, pulse, and oxygen saturation. The whole well-oiled machine was working to ensure the patient survived. Finally, when the surgery was complete and they were sure the vital signs were stable, Diego left the operating room, feeling a painful fatigue but also a sense of relief that everything had gone successfully. He took off his mask, sanitized his hands, and knew he could finally breathe, even if just for a minute. It suddenly hit him, just recently, you were a step away from drinking that cup with the unknown contents. In the hospital corridor, he ran into Isabel, the same orderly. She was standing by the window, holding a bundle of clean sheets. When she saw him, she immediately approached. So, how did it go? The patient is stable. I hope everything will be fine. Diego tried to smile, though he felt a rising tension inside. How about you? Everything all right? Yes, no one has asked me anything yet, she sighed. I tried to act normal. Ran around the ward, did some cleaning, helped the nurse on duty. But inside, it feels like someone is watching me. Sometimes I catch strange looks. Diego ran his hand through his hair, disheveled after removing his cap. Maybe it's just your impression. Or maybe someone already feels something's off. But for now, we have no direct evidence. We need to be careful. Are you going to see the head doctor? He called you. Yeah, I guess I'll have to. But I don't know what he's going to say. Maybe another lecture about not getting involved in financial matters. Or maybe he'll check if I drank that coffee. The orderly lowered her head, as if pondering something. If needed, I can wait by the door. In case you need help. Diego looked at her warmly. He had once known Isabel only as a new, diligent orderly who had joined their department 6 months ago. Now, she appeared in a completely different light, someone who wasn't afraid to warn about potential danger. That earned his respect and sympathy. Thank you, he said quietly. But I think it's better for you not to be seen near his office. He might have noticed our conversation in the cafeteria. All right, she understood that too much activity could only cause harm. But if anything, call me. I'll be around the ward. Diego nodded and walked toward the head doctor's office. Along the way, he had a brief internal monologue. What if he asks directly, why didn't you drink the coffee? Or starts threatening him? He had to keep himself composed, not show fear. As he approached the secretary's desk, he noticed the regular secretary was on maternity leave, replaced by a temporary assistant, a young woman who seemed inexperienced. She pointed to the door and said Dr. Raphael was waiting. Diego knocked quietly and entered. The head doctor was sitting behind a large desk, cluttered with papers. He looked quite friendly, even standing up to greet him. Ah, Dr. Diego, come in, have a seat. How was the surgery? Everything went well, the surgeon replied, trying to keep his tone steady. Wonderful. I'm glad. Dr. Raphael folded his hands on the desk, looking straight into Diego's eyes. You know, I called you in to discuss the procurement of new equipment for the surgical department. You yourself wanted quality machinery, modern suturing materials. I'm just signing the contract. Diego tensed up, realizing that this might be what everything had been about. Overpriced items, unclear suppliers, an unknown company. Yes, of course, he replied, trying to sound as polite as possible. I just wanted to make sure the supplier has the proper licenses and that the price isn't inflated. There are cheaper alternatives on the market. The head doctor leaned back in his chair. Dr. Diego, you know, in our business, sometimes it's not just the price that matters, but also reliability. Let's say, I have my channels through which I consider it appropriate to procure the necessary items. And we should not question the authority of the leadership. Or do you still doubt my competence? Diego felt a sting of anger and helplessness. He knew the head doctor's channels might simply be schemes that benefited someone personally, while the hospital absorbed the extra costs. But accusing him directly without proof meant signing his own death sentence. Plus, the very fact that this man might have tried to poison him meant he wouldn't stop at anything. Of course, I respect your opinion and experience, the surgeon sidestepped. As a doctor, I just want the best outcome for our patients. And if there's a way to save on purchases, why not spend the extra money on improving the department? Exactly, the head doctor said with a slight squint. By the way, how's your coffee? Did you manage to drink it? At that moment, Diego felt a red flag inside him go off. This was the direct touch on the subject. He answered as calmly as possible. Oh, it's been such a rush today. I put the cup on the table, then patients, then surgery. I didn't even manage to try it. Had to pour it out. Dr. Raphael gave him a strange look. Really? Didn't manage to? Diego shrugged. Our work is like that. Sometimes we don't even have time to eat. The head doctor tilted his head slightly. I understand. It's no big deal, you'll enjoy it next time. By the way, I ask you to refrain from discussing our internal matters. Not everything in our life should be aired. Especially if we want to maintain a friendly atmosphere in the team. Diego felt that this was an indirect threat. Keep quiet, or there will be problems. He nodded calmly, stood up, and briefly wished the head doctor well before leaving the office, trying not to show his panic. In the corridor, just outside the door, he stopped and took a breath. So, the head doctor had definitely checked whether he had drunk the coffee. And he was clearly unhappy that it hadn't happened. And his phrase about not airing our issues sounded like a warning. Diego looked around the corridor. There was no one near the office, only a nurse in the distance arranging a stack of papers in the file cabinet. I need to tell Isabel about this, he thought. But at the same time, he knew she was already on edge. Deciding not to rush, the doctor returned to the resident's room where his things were. This was the room where surgeons changed, sometimes rest briefly between surgeries, and do paperwork. There, he sat at the desk, opened the surgery log, and tried to focus on the routine entries. But his mind kept returning to the head doctor and his possible motives. Outside, in the corridor, the sound of footsteps, the rattle of laundry carts, and voices of patients' relatives echoed. The hospital, like a huge living organism, continued to work on its usual schedule. But now, Diego saw a threat in these walls. He couldn't understand how he could keep living like this when there was someone nearby capable of poisoning him. Of course, it wasn't certain it was poison. Maybe some laxative or narcotic meant to compromise him. But in any case, nothing good could come of it. Suddenly, the door to the resident's room opened slightly, and Isabel peeked in. Seeing that no one was there except Diego, she quickly entered and closed the door behind her, holding a bundle of gauze in her hands. Am I interrupting? She asked from the doorway. No, not at all. Come in. Diego gestured for her to sit in the chair next to him. How's your day? Busy too, she sighed and wiped the sweat off her forehead with her hand. I was just cleaning in the storage room and accidentally overheard one of our doctors, I think a cardiologist, saying that the head doctor's been acting a bit strange. He's been trying to remind everyone that he's the boss and hinted that some senior doctors might face trouble if they're too proactive. That conversation just scared me even more. Diego furrowed his brows. So he's trying to pressure everyone who might object to questionable decisions. By the way, I just saw him. He asked me directly if I drank the coffee. Looks like he wanted to make sure I accepted his little gift. Isabel pursed her lips together. Dios mío, this is so terrifying. And I don't even know what else he's capable of. Maybe we should report it to the health department? Or the authorities? Without evidence, no one will believe us, Diego said, darkening. They'll say we're imagining things. and he has enough connections to bury the case. Especially since the head doctor is a respected figure with a long career, and formally the hospital is thriving. Isabel, biting her lower lip, looked at the bundle in her hands. By the way, I brought you something from the lab. It's not poison, don't worry. I just thought, maybe we should try to figure out what happened ourselves. I went to our little lab under the pretext of getting gauze and gloves, and I overheard the lab assistant complaining about having too many samples and wishing she knew who to help faster. So, I thought maybe she'd agree to check if there were any foreign substances in the coffee if we secretly got a sample. But the problem is, the sample is gone. Diego nodded, realizing the idea was interesting, but the coffee had long been disposed of. Maybe if he tries to add something again, we'll catch him in the act, he suggested, though the thought of waiting for another poisoning attempt was chilling. They fell silent. Then Diego decided something more concrete had to be done. Isabel, do you trust any of the senior nurses or doctors enough to share your observations? We need at least one witness who can confirm our story. I'm not sure. You see, many here depend on the head doctor. Some have mortgages, others are waiting for promotions, and some are just afraid of losing their job. I doubt people will go against him. Diego understood she was right, but staying alone wasn't an option either. If another surprise came their way, they might need help. He decided to wait but also cautiously test the waters among his colleagues. At that moment, one of the doctors suddenly entered the resident's room. Alejandro, a young surgeon who sometimes assisted Diego, saw Isabel and smiled. "Oh, you're here? I was just looking for you to help carry the boxes of gloves. The warehouse downstairs is open, and there's no one to bring them up." She nodded silently, realizing that her conversation with Diego had to end. She didn't want to disclose what they had been discussing in front of Alejandro. But his smile seemed genuine, with no hint of anything ominous. Isabel thought, maybe he really is a good guy? I've never noticed him being close to the head doctor. However, this wasn't the right time to reveal secrets. Diego and Isabel exchanged nods, and she left with Alejandro, while Diego stayed in the resident's room, pondering what to do next. Soon, he was called to consult a patient in another block, and the day's work once again overshadowed his personal concerns. The rest of the day passed in endless rounds, consultations, and paperwork. By evening, Diego felt completely exhausted. However, the real shock awaited him around 8 in the evening when he was about to change and head home. Suddenly, panic erupted in the corridor. Someone was screaming for help, shouting the name of the on-duty doctor. Diego rushed to the source of the noise. There, in the emergency department, a man in a white coat was lying unconscious on the floor. Nurses were bustling around him, and Isabel stood by his head, bewilderedly pressing her palm to her lips. "It's..." she muttered, seeing Diego run up. "It's our anesthesiologist, Dr. Miguel Angel." He suddenly collapsed. Diego crouched next to him, quickly checking his pulse. He checked for breathing. "We need to get him to the ICU urgently. It looks like a critical condition. Someone, call the porters for a stretcher." Staff were already rushing for the stretcher. Diego asked Isabel to bring him a blood pressure cuff and stethoscope to check the pressure and at least get an idea of what was happening. But the anesthesiologist looked as if he could be having a heart attack, a stroke, or some kind of poisoning. "Did he say anything before he lost consciousness?" Diego asked Isabel. "No," she whispered. "I just caught the moment when he suddenly staggered, grabbed the wall, and his face went gray. I rushed over, and he was already falling to his side." They moved the anesthesiologist to the ICU and connected him to the machines. Diego and 2 other intensivists began intensive care. Isabel helped by fetching medications and supplies. However, the patient's condition was extremely severe: unstable blood pressure, weak pulse, labored breathing. Diego was frantically thinking, could he have drunk that same coffee? But the cup is lost. Or did the head doctor put something else in it, or was there a conflict between Dr. Miguel Angel and the head doctor? "Do you think it could be poisoning?" the intensivist asked quietly. Look at these strange symptoms: sudden collapse, breathing problems. It looks like anaphylactic shock, but he had no allergies. Maybe poison? Diego almost instinctively nodded. Yes, it looks like poison. But he couldn't say out loud who he thought was behind it. They needed evidence. The battle for the anesthesiologist's life lasted half an hour. Finally, they managed to stabilize him, but he didn't regain consciousness. He remained in a deep coma, and no one could give any predictions. Let's move him to a separate box, Diego ordered. Monitor him 24/7. And please take blood for a full toxicology analysis. The intensivist nodded, and his face showed clear concern. When the chaos settled down, Isabel and Diego stood by the ICU door, mentally exhausted. Dr. Diego, do you think this is no accident? She asked quietly, looking at the anesthesiologist lying behind the glass partition. I'm afraid so. Maybe he knew something or was going to oppose the head doctor. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but too many coincidences. What now? Isabel's eyes were filled with fear. If it really is him, the head doctor, and he can do things like this so easily, we're in great danger. Diego wanted to say that everything would be fine, but he couldn't lie. He himself understood how serious the situation was. We need to be extremely careful, he replied. Let's wait for the test results. It might reveal which substance caused this. If it's some rare poison, the anesthesiologist likely didn't just accidentally come across it. Then we'll have more grounds for an investigation. Isabel nodded, wiping her tears. Diego hugged her shoulders, trying to calm her down even a little. They stood there for a couple of minutes, then footsteps echoed down the corridor, and Dr. Raphael appeared. He was walking quickly toward the ICU, his face tense. What happened here? He asked sternly. They say the anesthesiologist is in critical condition. Diego nodded briefly. Yes, Dr. Miguel Angel suddenly lost consciousness. We resuscitated him. He's in critical condition. The head doctor frowned. Do you think this is poisoning? Or something else? The surgeon spoke cautiously. It's too early to say, investigations are ongoing. But the symptoms are worrying. Dr. Raphael briefly turned his gaze away. I see. We shouldn't cause panic among the staff and patients. Let the doctors handle it quietly. He raised an eyebrow, glanced at Isabel, but said nothing to her. Then he turned to Diego. You'll make sure everything's fine? Of course, Diego replied shortly. The head doctor nodded and left. The glass door to the ICU closed behind him. Isabel and Diego exchanged looks. On one hand, Dr. Raphael showed concern, but on the other hand, his request to keep the situation quiet could mean not letting outsiders in on what was going on. He clearly wants to cover it up, whispered the orderly. Who would believe it's just a coincidence? Diego didn't know what to say in response. He himself felt that everything going on seemed like a nightmare. Yesterday the coffee being tampered with, today the anesthesiologist with unclear poisoning. All of this amidst suspicious procurements and rising tensions in the hospital. But he kept up the appearance of doing his job and tried not to raise the head doctor's suspicions about his active resistance. While the intensivists continued to treat the anesthesiologist, Diego and Isabel decided to head home since their shifts were over. The evening sky outside the hospital had darkened, and only the on-duty teams remained in the corridors. They left the building. Walking along the path by the entrance, they shifted their weight from foot to adjust to the cool wind. I'll walk you, Diego offered. You can see what's going on. I don't want to leave you alone outside at this hour. Isabel was about to argue that the bus stop wasn't far, but the situation felt too tense to refuse. She nodded, and they walked toward the stop together. Along the way, they stayed alert, checking if anyone was following them. But the people leaving the hospital were just ordinary staff, with no sign of a tail. Dr. Diego, Isabel spoke as they stood together waiting for the bus. I'm really scared. This person, the head doctor, he could easily force me out of my job. But what's even scarier is that he could do something bad to me or to you. Diego looked at her concerned face. She looked so young, almost like a child, despite being 27. He felt a wave of compassion and guilt. Should she really be involved in this? Listen, Isabel, he said quietly. I'll be here. We can't turn a blind eye to his actions if he's really making money illegally and willing to get rid of people. We need to find allies. And we have to do it carefully. Isabel breathed a sigh of relief. Thank you. I'm glad you're here. And thank you for warning me. Who knows what would have happened to me, he said, remembering that ill-fated cup of coffee. The bus arrived. Isabel sat down and left, while Diego stayed at the stop, trying to catch a taxi to get home faster. Inside, he felt that tomorrow would require him to continue a game that was becoming more and more dangerous. That night, Diego tossed and turned, unable to sleep. His mind was filled with images: the head doctor's face, the anesthesiologist's dead eyes, Isabel's frightened eyes. He pondered how to strategize. He had some acquaintances in law enforcement, but they weren't too close. Should he go to them empty-handed? The risk of an informant was high, as it was unclear who might be in contact with the head doctor. Morning came, and after a quick breakfast, Diego headed to the hospital. He had worked there for 10 years, starting right after his internship, never imagining he'd have to investigate potential murders or poisonings within these walls. Entering the lobby, he sensed the tense atmosphere. Staff walked around concerned. Rumors floated in the air that the anesthesiologist had suffered a stroke or heart attack. Very few knew the real cause. When Diego entered the ICU, he saw the anesthesiologist in critical condition, hooked up to machines. He still hadn't regained consciousness, and his vital signs remained unstable. Dr. Carmen, an experienced intensivist in her 50s with a rather tough character, was on duty. "How is he?" Diego asked as he approached her. "No change so far," Dr. Carmen replied reservedly. "We're waiting for the toxicology results." "When are they expected?" "They said by the evening, but, as you know, they might be delayed." Diego nodded, understanding there could be a delay if someone higher up had requested they take their time. "Tell me," he suddenly asked, "have you noticed that Dr. Miguel Angel seemed agitated lately? Maybe he talked about some problems?" Dr. Carmen snorted. "Well, he didn't agree with some of the head doctor's orders, especially regarding the supply of medications and equipment. But he rarely spoke out openly. I only heard him ranting in the corridor once, saying it couldn't go on like this, that someone was stealing money. I didn't think much of it. I thought it was just some everyday discontent." Diego sighed. It seemed the anesthesiologist really had been digging into the head doctor's activities. And those who dig get targeted. "Thank you, Dr. Carmen," he said, and after briefly checking on the patient again, he left. In the hallway, Isabel rushed up to him. She was already on shift and looked extremely tense. "Dr. Diego, there," she began, then hesitated, looking around. "Let's go to the residence room." They entered the empty residence room, and Isabel quietly said, "I overheard one of the lab techs saying that the anesthesiologist's tests showed some suspicious substance in his blood, something like a neurotoxin, but of unclear origin. The lab tech wanted to report it to the toxicology department, but it seems they told him to wait for now." Diego went cold. "So it really was poison. Well, this is getting very serious. If it's a synthetic and rare substance, we need to figure out how it could have gotten to the anesthesiologist." Isabel whispered. "And where will we get the evidence that the head doctor did it? So far, we've only seen that he put something in your coffee. But we haven't proven it was poison. I think Dr. Miguel Angel might have kept some papers or files that confirm the procurement fraud. Maybe the head doctor decided to get rid of him. You see, if the anesthesiologist had the chance to raise a fuss, it would have been the end for the head doctor." Diego bit his lip, thinking, maybe we should try looking through his things or ask his close ones. The orderly frowned. "But that's an invasion of privacy. Or do we want to save him and ourselves?" I don't know, we'll have to take the risk, Diego decided. I'll go to the nurse who was on duty with the anesthesiologist. Maybe he left something in his locker or somewhere in the anesthesiologist's residence room. Isabel agreed. I'll try to stay close by and help if needed. Throughout the day, they tried to gather information discreetly. Diego spoke with several nurses, hinting that Dr. Miguel Angel might have left important documents behind. They searched, but no one knew much. However, closer to the evening, when many staff members began to leave, they found their moment and slipped into the anesthesiologist's break room. It was a small room with a cabinet for personal belongings, a sofa, and a table. Here's his locker, Isabel said, pointing to the nameplate on the anesthesiologist's locker. But it's probably locked. Diego checked. Indeed, it's locked with a code lock. How will we open it? He wondered. We don't know the code. Isabel looked around. Maybe there's a slip of paper with the code somewhere. Or he wrote it on the inside. Diego tried randomly turning the lock's dial, recalling that many people use simple combinations like 0000 or a birthday. After a few fruitless seconds, he was about to give up, but suddenly heard a soft click. The lock opened. They exchanged glances, so the code was simple. The anesthesiologist probably didn't expect he'd need to protect himself from colleagues. Inside the locker were medical journals, clean clothes, a few packs of personal medications, probably painkillers, vitamins, and a couple of folders. Look, Isabel whispered, handing Diego one of the folders. It says contracts. They opened it and found photocopies of contracts for medical equipment supplies. The supplier names were unfamiliar, and the amounts were clearly inflated. At the end of the documents, there was Dr. Rafael's signature everywhere. Here it is, Diego exhaled. So Dr. Miguel Angel was collecting evidence of corruption. It seems he was preparing for a major move, a complaint to the Ministry of Health or law enforcement. Isabel's hands trembled. Now it's clear why he was poisoned. And why they wanted to poison you. You also asked uncomfortable questions about the supplies. We need to hide these documents somewhere, Diego decided. And give them to someone who can start an investigation. But we have to be very careful. If the head doctor finds out we've found them. He realized it wasn't the best time to run to the police in the middle of the night, and no one would take him seriously anyway. Moreover, the head doctor surely had his finger on the pulse, with connections. They needed to find someone trustworthy without putting themselves or Isabel at risk. They carefully closed the locker, trying to return the lock to its previous position, and quietly left the room. The hallway was empty, with only the occasional dim light from the overhead lamps. Diego pressed the folder to his chest. Let's take this to my residence room. I'll hide it in the cabinet. Tomorrow, I'll try to contact a retired investigator I know. He still has some connections. Isabel nodded. They walked together, adrenaline pumping through them. It seemed like at every corner, a guard or someone from the head doctor's team might be lurking. But fortunately, no one stopped them from getting to the residence room and hiding the documents. Done, Diego said, closing the cabinet door. I think it'll be safe until morning. But you still need to stay alert. Go home now. I'll stay a little longer to check the patient's condition after today's surgery. Okay, she agreed, feeling relieved that the folder wasn't at her place. If the head doctor conducts a search, at least she wouldn't be personally at risk. Try not to stay too late. Diego escorted her to the hospital exit. She left, and he returned to the department, made the necessary notes in the patient's chart, and spoke with the night shift. When he finally left the hospital, it was almost midnight. He had to catch a taxi again, looking at the empty streets. Whether it was from exhaustion or nerves, he felt like the head doctor's shadow was lurking around every corner, like a predator waiting for its prey. But he made it home without incident. The next morning, slightly sleep-deprived, Diego headed back to the hospital. He planned to find the right moment to take the documents and visit the retired investigator he had mentioned. But at the doorstep of the department, he was met by an anxious Alejandro, the same young surgeon. Dr. Diego, we need you, Alejandro spoke quickly. We have an emergency surgery, a patient with a perforated ulcer. I need you to assist. Diego understood that he couldn't delay. A person's life was more important. He rushed to change. A thought echoed in his head. I hope no one has gotten into the resident's room. But there was no time to waste. Surgery waits for no one. Nearly 4 hours later, they had operated on the patient with severe complications. Diego's entire focus had been on the surgery, and only occasionally did thoughts about the hidden documents and danger cross his mind. Finally, after finishing, he made the post-surgery notes, and after changing, he headed to the resident's room. No one was there. He immediately opened the locker where he had hidden the folder. His heart skipped a beat as he looked inside. Everything was in place. Thank God. Now we need to act, he murmured to himself. We can't delay. He carefully packed the folder into a bag, also adding the notebook with dates and amounts, which appeared to be personal notes from the anesthesiologist, and left the resident's room. On his way out, he decided to check in on Isabel. She was on duty in another wing today, where they had her cleaning and assisting in the dressing room. He found her in the corridor, mopping the floor, but when she saw Diego, she straightened up and put the mop down. Have you found a way to pass on the materials? She asked quietly. I'm about to. I have a good friend, a retired investigator. I trust him. Maybe he knows how to make sure the head doctor doesn't cover his tracks. Isabel noticed the bag in Diego's hands and felt a flash of concern. Be careful. If the head doctor figures out you have the documents. Diego nodded. I'll try. You also need to make sure no one sees us talking about this. She took up the mop again, pretending to be busy with her work. Diego made his way to the exit, feeling a rush of adrenaline. He knew that this move could cost him his career, and in the worst case, his health or even his life, but there was no other choice. However, as he was about to reach the doors, Dr. Rafael, the head doctor, suddenly appeared around the corner. His cold gaze fell on the bag Diego was holding. Dr. Diego, where are you headed during working hours? The head doctor asked, trying to keep his voice steady, but there was a steel undertone. Diego forced himself to smile. Hello. I'm dealing with some personal matters. I have a break. Need to take something. Dr. Rafael stared at him intently. Really? What's in the bag? Are you taking the patient's medical records? What are you talking about? Diego waved his hand dismissively, trying to appear calm. It's just a couple of personal papers. The head doctor frowned but didn't press the issue further. He simply said, I'd like to speak with you about an order. When you're done, come to my office. Diego nodded and walked past the head doctor. As the doctor moved away, Diego almost ran to the exit, his heart pounding wildly. He caught a taxi and headed to the address of a retired investigator he knew, Manuel Ramirez, who lived nearby. During the ride, he glanced nervously out the window several times, feeling as though he were being followed. But it seemed like it was clear. The retiree lived in a small private house. Diego entered the yard and knocked. Manuel Ramirez, a man in his 60s with kind wrinkles around his eyes but very sharp eyes, opened the door. Oh, Diego, come in. Something urgent? He asked, smiling. You don't usually visit me on a workday. The surgeon entered and smelled the tea and pastries, but there was no time for pleasantries. He hurriedly explained the situation, the suspicious procurement deals, the anesthesiologist's poisoning, and how the head doctor seemed to be eliminating anyone who got in his way. Manuel listened, frowning, asking for details now and then. I see this smells like kerosene, he grumbled. Diego, you're messing with a serious gang, or at least a very dangerous person. Show me the documents. Diego showed him the folder. The old investigator quickly skimmed through it. This is definitely manipulation. The head doctor's signatures, the prices are several times higher than the market rate. There's grounds to believe this is large-scale corruption. But we need the proper authorities to handle this. If he has connections in the local health department, this could be covered up. We need to go higher, or straight to law enforcement. But there are risks there too. What should I do? Diego asked in desperation. First, we'll make 2 copies. I'll keep one, and I'll give the other to trusted people. If something happens, the documents will surface. Manuel Ramirez stood up decisively and led Diego to his printer/scanner. Then I'll consult with a friend in the regional prosecutor's office, a guy I know is honest. But you, son, need to be extremely careful. Cover your back. Diego thought about Isabel. That will be my first priority, to protect her. All right, he said, watching Manuel Ramirez scan and copy the documents. Thank you. I'm willing to do everything to stop these misdeeds, but I'm scared. The pensioner placed the copies in a separate folder. Fear is natural. But your options aren't great. Stay silent and wait for him to get rid of you, or take action. You at least have an alibi, and you can say the anesthesiologist found all this and you're just trying to make it public. Diego nodded. He understood there was no turning back. When the documents were copied, Manuel Ramirez put the originals and copies in different folders. Leave the originals with me. I'll stay in touch with the prosecutor, he said. You take the copies, but keep them in a safe place. If they try to search you, let them think you have nothing. Diego thanked him for his help. While the pensioner prepared a black plastic bag to hide the copies, they briefly discussed the details. Then the surgeon said goodbye and left the yard. Now, the copies were in his hands, and the originals were with Manuel Ramirez. This would hopefully increase their chances of success. When he returned to the hospital, it was already lunchtime. The cafeteria was noisy. Diego, trying to avoid attention, headed to his residence room. On the way, he saw Isabel, who waved at him, signaling that they would talk later. But before they could cross paths, the head doctor appeared in the hallway. Dr. Diego, did you want to say something? Dr. Rafael asked with forced cheerfulness. I asked you to come to my office when you're free. Diego realized he couldn't avoid the conversation and nodded. Yes, of course. I'm coming. He felt his heart race. The head doctor might already have a tip-off that Diego had left the hospital with the folder. He'd have to stay calm. They entered the office. The head doctor closed the door and sat Diego down across from him. There was an empty coffee cup on the desk, which triggered unpleasant associations in Diego's mind. So, Dr. Rafael said, interlacing his fingers. You know, we have an inspection from the health department coming up. There are rumors circulating. I'd like to ask you to refrain from unnecessary talk about procurement or supply issues. Everything is under control here. Diego responded cautiously. Of course, I understand. But may I ask, what about the anesthesiologist's case? Don't you think it's necessary to investigate where the toxin came from? The head doctor shot him a quick glance. What do you mean? I've only heard that he had a serious cardiovascular issue. No confirmation of poisoning. If it was poisoning, he could have ingested anything. Maybe he was trying to take something himself. Diego internally shuddered. The head doctor was trying to pass it off as an unfortunate accident. But the lab technicians. Diego started. The lab techs won't confirm anything for you, Dr. Rafael cut him off, grimacing. Listen, doctor, stay out of things that aren't your business. I know you're a good surgeon, but I'm the one in charge here. And if I hear anyone spreading rumors or slander about malicious actions within our hospital, I'll have to take action. You don't want problems, do you? Diego realized this was a direct threat. His hands clenched into fists under the table, but he forced himself to remain calm. Of course, I don't want problems. I was just asking, concerned about my colleague. The head doctor nodded briefly and gestured for him to leave. As Diego was about to exit, he noticed the head doctor's cheek twitch, as though he was barely holding back his anger. Diego left the office and breathed a sigh of relief. He approached the window in the hallway and immediately caught Isabel's gaze. She glanced around warily, and they pretended to walk together toward the elevator. "So, what happened?" she asked quietly. "He threatened me," Diego replied. "He wants me to stay silent." Isabel frowned. "We need to act as soon as possible. Otherwise, he'll try to destroy us." Diego nodded briefly. "I've already done something. The original documents are in a safe place. I have the copies. Now we just need to wait for the signal from my contact. He'll try to involve the regional prosecutor's office." They fell silent, watching as a colleague passed them in the hallway. Then Isabel suggested, "I heard that after lunch, there will be a meeting with the health department inspectors. Maybe we can eavesdrop and hear what they're saying? We might learn something useful." Diego thought for a moment. "It's risky, but try. Unfortunately, I'll have to be at the dressing stations after the surgery patients. If you can do it, just be careful not to get caught." Isabel agreed. They parted ways. Diego headed to his patients' rooms, while Isabel made her way to the conference room, where the head doctor was holding the meeting with the health department officials. Naturally, no one had invited the orderly in, but she managed to open the door from the storage room leading to an adjoining room. There were chairs there, sometimes used for storage. Through the crack in the door, she could catch bits of what was being said. She listened closely. Dr. Raphael's voice was loud and confident. He was talking about the hospital's achievements, the reduction of waiting times, and the upcoming arrival of new modern equipment, conveniently omitting the fact that it had been purchased at inflated prices. The officials politely asked questions in return. "Tell us," one of the officials' voices asked, "how is the funding for supplies this year? Is everything transparent?" "Absolutely transparent," the head doctor's voice responded. "We've got accounting, and all the acceptance records are in order. No problems." "And what do you say about the recent incident with the anesthesiologist?" another official asked. "We heard he's in critical condition." "That's an internal matter," Dr. Raphael replied. "I found out he had a serious heart condition that he was hiding. The problems flared up. Yes, he's in the ICU now, but the doctors are doing their best." Isabel clenched her fists. "Everything is a lie. They know full well it wasn't his heart, it was poison. Or at least Dr. Raphael knew it. But she couldn't barge in and tell the truth, they would just fire her." It seemed like the officials had decided not to dig deeper, only conducting a formal check, looking at some documents, and soon saying that if everything was in order, they were satisfied. The meeting ended shortly after. Isabel almost jumped when someone opened the door from the other side of the storage room, but she managed to slip behind a shelf just in time. When she emerged into the corridor, the officials were already leaving. They were walking with the head doctor toward the exit. Dr. Raphael was smiling, shaking their hands as though saying goodbye. Isabel understood that this inspection had uncovered nothing, it was all kept under wraps. The rest of the day passed in tension. Diego and Isabel occasionally exchanged glances but couldn't speak openly. The head doctor was also walking around the department, sternly observing everyone, as if showing that he had everything under control. By evening, Diego managed to slip away to the resident's room to call Manuel Ramirez, his contact at the prosecutor's office. He said he had arranged a meeting with a reliable person from the regional prosecutor's office, but it would take a few days to gather the full set of evidence and prepare an official report. Diego knew that these few days could be critically dangerous. Night fell. Isabel remained on the night shift, and Diego was about to leave when he suddenly decided it was better to stay in the hospital for safety. He asked Alejandro, the young surgeon, to cover for him, saying he would spend the night in the resident's room. Alejandro didn't ask further questions. That night, the hospital was shrouded in semi-darkness. Isabel was going about her usual tasks, mopping the corridors, checking in the treatment rooms, helping if anyone called for her. Diego, now dressed in regular clothes, sat in the resident's room, sipping tea from his thermos, deciding to be cautious about hospital tea. Around midnight, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Diego peeked through the slightly open door. A man in dark clothes, clearly not a doctor or patient, walked down the hallway. Maybe a security guard? But the guards at this hospital were all in uniform, and this man was dressed casually. He was carrying something that looked like a folder under his arm, glancing around as though looking for a room. Something's not right, Diego thought, and, slightly closing the door, he began to watch through the crack. The man approached the locker against the wall, as if he wanted to open it, but it was locked. He cursed quietly, then pulled out a set of lockpicks. Diego froze. Could they already be searching for those documents? At that moment, Isabel appeared in the corridor with a bucket and mop. Seeing her, the man hastily put away the lockpick and pretended to be looking for the bathroom. Isabel gave him a suspicious look. "Can I help you, sir?" He quickly mumbled. "I'm looking for the utility room. I was told it's around here." "The utility room is on another floor," Isabel replied coldly. "Go down the stairs, and you'll see a door with a sign." The man nodded and turned to walk away. Isabel watched him carefully. Once he disappeared around the corner, she set down the bucket and quietly made her way to the residence room where Diego was. He let her in and locked the door behind her. "Did you see him?" she asked in a half-whisper. "Some guy. I saw him. I think he was looking for our documents." Dios mío. So the head doctor sent someone to search at night to avoid raising suspicion? Looks like it. Diego ran his hand through his hair, trying to calm his nerves. "We don't keep anything in the lockers except for medical tools." So he was probably trying to pick the lock. "Good thing he didn't get to my personal things. I already took the folder out." Isabel sighed with relief. "Well, at least that's good. But it's scary to think what would happen if he finds out you still have copies." They both understood that the situation was escalating. The head doctor was becoming more and more aggressive, and they didn't know what steps he would take next. "I think we need to stay together as much as possible. If something happens, we need a witness." Diego noticed the lights in the corridor flicker off. It could just be a power-saving measure or a small malfunction. He didn't want to wander the empty halls in the dark. "How about this? You keep working as usual, and I'll stay here tonight. In the morning, we can wait together for the shift to start." Isabel nodded and left, taking her bucket and mop. As she was leaving, she turned around and locked eyes with Diego. Her gaze showed a mix of fear, exhaustion, and gratitude. He nodded. "Hang in there." The night passed relatively quietly. The man in dark clothes didn't appear again, or perhaps he was lying low. In the morning, the hospital came to life again with the arrival of the new shifts. The sun, which we won't describe in detail, had started to rise, illuminating the corridors and strips across the linoleum. Diego immediately went to check on the anesthesiologist in the ICU. He was still in a coma, with no improvements. If he doesn't recover, we won't get any direct confirmation from him, Diego thought. But maybe the testimony of other staff members and these documents would be enough. After a brief round of checks, Diego left the ICU and entered the lobby, where he unexpectedly found a gathering of staff. Some of his colleagues were talking animatedly, many had concerned looks on their faces. In the center stood Dr. Rafael, the head doctor. He was making an announcement loudly. "Please, everyone, calm down. There will be an external inspection by the prosecutor's office. This is a standard procedure in response to complaints from some patients. I ask you not to worry. Everything will be fine, as long as no one stirs the pot with ridiculous rumors." Diego felt something tighten inside him. So, the prosecutor's office had come. It was probably the investigator he knew who had set this up. But then, the thought flashed, if the head doctor is warned, he might clean up the evidence. Isabel, who was standing among the nurses, caught Diego's gaze and nodded slightly. It seemed she understood too, this was the real fight. The day passed in nervous tension. Some people in civilian clothes, accompanied by the head doctor, were walking around. Sometimes they asked staff questions, examined documents in the HR department. Diego tried to stay out of sight, but eventually he was called in. Dr. Diego, a middle-aged man, introduced himself as a prosecutor's office employee. "We'd like to clarify some details about the purchases in your department. Do you know which instruments were purchased?" Diego felt adrenaline surge inside him. And there, next to him, stood Dr. Raphael, arms crossed, watching him closely. Diego knew that if he told the whole truth now, the head doctor could strike at him before the investigation was over. But if he stayed silent, the case might be buried. He decided to take a cautious approach. "I only know the basics. The accounting department handles it. I'm just a doctor. But yes, I heard new suturing materials and equipment came in." The prosecutor nodded. "Can you name the supplier?" "I wasn't told the exact names of the companies," the surgeon replied. "That's more of a question for the head doctor." The head doctor, listening to this, smirked as if pleased that Diego wasn't directly implicating him. But the prosecutor continued. "Don't you think the prices might have been inflated?" Dr. Raphael interjected. "Excuse me, he already said he's not in charge of finances. Questions like that should be directed at me and my deputies. You are probably confusing the doctor with the economic department." The prosecutor looked away and jotted something down in his notebook. Then they thanked Diego for his time and moved on to other staff members. Diego watched them go, feeling uneasy. He realized that this official check might easily miss the heart of the issue unless there was more solid evidence and a direct statement. A direct statement meant they would be exposed. Meanwhile, the head doctor leaned in and quietly said to him, "See, it's all simple. Don't worry, these inspections are routine," and then added in a lower voice, "I hope you don't want to damage our reputation with rumors." Diego understood this was another warning. He nodded, though inside he was seething. But it's not over yet, he thought. The next day, the inspection officially ended. The prosecutors left, promising to further review the documents. The hospital returned to its usual routine, but now Diego and Isabel knew the key moment would come when their familiar investigator contacted higher authorities. Maybe then the head doctor wouldn't escape. However, Dr. Raphael seemed to sense something was brewing. He called a meeting of senior doctors and started threatening layoffs and disciplinary checks. His tone was harsh. Those who went against the leadership would quickly find themselves out of a job. People were frightened, whispering about it in the hallways. Diego and Isabel began to notice that the same man in dark clothes was sometimes following them. He was supposedly a security guard from a private company hired for the hospital's safety. In reality, he was the head doctor's eyes and ears. They had to be extremely cautious. Several days passed in anxiety. Finally, in the evening, when Diego was about to head home, Manuel Ramirez called. "It's all set," he said briefly. "Tomorrow morning, people from the capital's office will arrive. Not like the local inspectors. I suggest you and the orderly stick together. There might be a big scandal." Diego thanked him and hung up. He told Isabel that tomorrow would be the decisive day. She looked pale but determined. "All right, if I need to give testimony, I'm ready." And indeed, in the morning, a whole group arrived at the hospital, people in sharp suits, accompanied by law enforcement. When the head doctor saw them, he paled, tried to smile, and said, "Hello, how can I help?" But they immediately began inspecting documents, entering the HR department, and questioning staff. Diego and Isabel stayed on alert. If they were called, they would have to tell the whole truth. But for now, they waited. By noon, the hospital was buzzing with rumors that the head doctor was being cornered. He was sitting in his office with the inspectors, with whom he'd signed a non-disclosure agreement. Diego carefully took the key contracts from Manuel Ramirez. He had passed them through an intermediary, keeping them in his bag, ready to present if needed. Isabel was nearby, still pretending to be busy cleaning, but really waiting for a signal. Suddenly, a woman in her 40s, with a neat haircut and a formal jacket, approached them and showed her ID. "I'm Consuelo Vargas from the capital's Economic Crime Department." "You're Diego Antonio, and you're Isabel," she said, naming the orderly. "We need to talk." They exchanged glances, a mix of fear and relief in their eyes. They nodded and asked her to find a quiet place. Consuelo Vargas led them to a small office where no one had been. She closed the door behind them. "So, I know you have some evidence about the head doctor's corruption schemes. And you have information about the possible poisoning of the anesthesiologist. Tell me everything." Diego began speaking, pulling out the papers, explaining how he had found them in the anesthesiologist's locker, how the man was in a coma after a strange attack, how the head doctor had put an unknown powder in the coffee, and how Isabel had saved his life. The young woman confirmed the details and added that she had seen the packet with the suspicious substance herself. Consuelo Vargas listened attentively, taking notes, and occasionally asked clarifying questions. Then she thanked them. "Thank you, you've been very helpful. We've already seized some documents from the accounting department. There are clear discrepancies. Now, your information and these copies will strengthen the case. As for the poisoning, we need to conduct further tests. We found a substance in the anesthesiologist's blood that resembles a neurotoxin. This is already an attempted murder case. We're planning to question the head doctor under protocol." Isabel exhaled. "So, you really can hold him accountable?" Consuelo Vargas nodded. "We have enough grounds to open a criminal case. But I warn you, he may resist and try to cover his tracks, put pressure on you. Be careful." They thanked her. As they left the office, Diego and Isabel felt as though a weight had been lifted off their shoulders. Finally, the authorities were taking them seriously. However, in the afternoon, something happened that they hadn't expected. The loudspeaker announced that all doctors and medical staff should gather in the assembly hall. People trickled in, whispering among themselves. When everyone was seated, Dr. Rafael Mendoza entered with a tense expression, followed by several unfamiliar men in civilian clothes. "Dear colleagues," the head doctor began, scanning the room. "Unfortunately, we've had an unpleasant situation. A signal has come from the prosecutor's office that some employees have accused me of all sorts of crimes, including corruption and even attempted murder. I want to say that this is complete slander. And I will do everything to find and punish those responsible for spreading these filthy rumors. Our team has always been united, and these slanderers need to be expelled." The room buzzed with whispers. Some lowered their eyes in embarrassment, others exchanged glances, realizing that the guilty parties were most likely Diego, the anesthesiologist, and everyone involved. Moreover, the head doctor continued, "I have already signed orders for the dismissal of certain employees who are suspected of gross violations of professional ethics." Isabel glanced at Diego, who was standing nearby by the wall, her face filled with dread. "Are they really going to announce us now?" The thought flashed through her mind. "Here," said the head doctor, "Isabel, the orderly," he named her surname, "has been caught systematically violating work discipline and causing turmoil. Therefore, today she is dismissed from her position. The order has been signed." The crowd gasped. Isabel froze, feeling her knees tremble. Diego was about to approach her, but the head doctor continued. "Also, other individuals may face disciplinary measures. I hope this matter will be resolved soon, and our team will be rid of the dishonest elements." He finished his speech, and people began to disperse, a buzz of discussion filling the air. Isabel stood pale, her hands pressed to her chest, her eyes moistening. "They fired me." Diego embraced her shoulders. "Calm down, don't panic, this is illegal. He dismissed you without cause, based on a fabricated violation. Most likely, this is an attempt to intimidate. But I don't even have a permanent contract," she whispered. "I was hired 6 months ago. It's easy to throw me out. I don't even know if I'll be able to prove anything." Diego squeezed her hand. "Don't worry. Since the case is already with the prosecutor's office, they can fire you, but it will look like witness tampering. Let them try. We'll try to challenge the order." At that moment, Consuelo Vargas from the Capitol's office approached them. "I heard he fired the girl." "Don't worry. It's all a fabrication. We're documenting everything. Once the criminal case is opened, such actions will be considered obstruction of justice." Isabel felt a bit of relief, but the tears were still welling up in her throat. It hurt and scared her to lose her job, especially since she had come here to help people, and now the truth was getting her thrown out. The day dragged on painfully. The head doctor continued walking around the hospital, issuing orders, trying to show that he was still in control. But closer to the evening, police arrived with a warrant to search the head doctor's office and the accounting department. Diego and Isabel were sitting in the residence room at the time. Excited voices and the secretary's shouts were heard from the corridor. Half an hour later, the door of the residence room swung open, and a hospital security guard entered with a stranger. They immediately ordered, "Diego Antonio, you need to come with us to the head doctor's office." He realized this was probably about an interrogation. Isabel, confused, stayed behind, but they asked her to. "And you? Come with us." In the office, there were already several police officers going through documents, along with Consuelo Vargas. The head doctor was sitting at his desk, his face red with anger, but he tried to keep his composure. Upon the arrival of Diego and Isabel, he spat through gritted teeth. "Here they are, the slanderers. I hope you'll investigate them too." Consuelo Vargas gestured for Diego and Isabel to approach. They walked over, trying to stay calm, though inside, they were shaking. "We've found some documents," Consuelo Vargas said, "which confirm the facts of corruption. We also have witness testimonies that the head doctor tried to blackmail employees into silence." The head doctor jumped up. "This is a lie. This is a political attack. These people, they set me up." Consuelo Vargas looked at him coldly. "Nevertheless, we have enough evidence. Rafael Mendoza, you're under arrest pending further investigation." She nodded to the police officers. "Search his personal belongings." The head doctor was about to protest, but one of the officers showed him the warrant. He trembled with rage and began shouting, "You have no right. I'm a distinguished doctor, I've just been slandered." But the police had already pulled him aside, searching his pockets and desk. Under the desk, they found an inconspicuous hidden compartment with a small plastic bag of white powder inside. "What's this?" asked Consuelo Vargas, holding up the bag with gloves. The head doctor turned pale. "I have no idea. You must have planted it yourself." Diego and Isabel exchanged glances. This was probably the same poison, or something similar. Now everything fell into place. The officers, instructing the head doctor to remain silent, continued their search, finding more documents, before leading Rafael Mendoza out of the office in handcuffs. He looked as though he was ready to lunge at Diego and Isabel, but they held him by the shoulders. "You will pay for this," he shouted, glancing at them. "I swear you'll regret starting all this." But no one paid attention to his threats anymore. They led him down the corridor as the hospital staff parted in confusion. Some gasped, others looked secretly relieved. Many probably understood that the man who had tyrannized them was capable of extreme measures, but didn't dare stand up to him. When the head doctor was taken away, Consuelo Vargas turned to Diego and Isabel. "Now we'll proceed with official proceedings, open a criminal case, and conduct investigative actions. You will most likely be called for further questioning, but as witnesses. Do you agree to cooperate?" "Yes," Diego nodded, still not believing this was happening. "Of course," Isabel added quietly, wiping away tears of either relief or shock. "Calm down," said Consuelo Vargas, "and don't worry about the dismissal. I think that decision will be annulled since it was made under pressure." Isabel nodded gratefully. Diego hugged her shoulders, feeling the anxiety from the past few days recede. They had done it. Of course, it wasn't over in an instant. There were formal procedures ahead: court, the public exposure of the fraud involving huge sums. It turned out that the head doctor was involved in fraudulent medical equipment and drug supply schemes through fake companies, accepting kickbacks. And when employees like the anesthesiologist and Diego began asking questions, he decided to eliminate the dangerous witnesses. Fortunately, by some stroke of luck and thanks to Isabel's bravery, murder had been avoided. The anesthesiologist, who had been in a coma for another couple of weeks, began to recover. When he was finally able to speak, he gave all the necessary testimony to the investigation. With Diego and Isabel's support, he recalled details that confirmed the corruption, which played a crucial role in court. Isabel returned to work, was reinstated as an orderly, and even received a permanent contract due to her diligence and contributions. The staff gradually exhaled, seeing that the hospital was now managed by a temporary, more decent interim head. The appointment of a new head doctor was expected after all the court procedures. Diego, after going through an official interrogation, stayed at the hospital as one of the leading surgeons. His reputation only strengthened, and his colleagues began to respect him even more for his courage and integrity. Many recalled how he wasn't afraid to speak out about procurement issues and only later realized the risks it posed. As for their personal relationship with Isabel, they had grown closer throughout this fight. Long conversations in empty corridors, mutual support, and the risks they had shared together, these things created warm feelings. At first, they communicated somewhat reservedly, unsure how the team would react to a workplace romance, but gradually, they stopped hiding. Their colleagues treated them warmly. If someone saves your life, it's only natural that you support each other in life as well. A few months later, the court sentenced Rafael Mendoza to prison for embezzlement and attempted murder. It was clearly proven that the powder found in his desk was a dangerous poison. The analysis matched the substance found in the anesthesiologist's blood. The forged documents the head doctor had tried to destroy were preserved, and the witness testimonies and expert opinions were irrefutable. When the verdict was final, the hospital entered a period of renewal and cleansing. The new leadership promised to stop the practice of shady schemes and started improving the working conditions for the staff. Patients, who initially feared the scandal, were reassured when they saw that the surgical department was still saving lives at the same high level, or maybe even better. Diego continued working as a surgeon, operating on critically ill patients, providing consultations, and conducting scientific work. Isabel, having found a passion for the profession, started studying to become a nurse, aiming to advance her career and help people more competently. Diego supported her. "You're capable, you'll make it." Sometimes, on rare free evenings, they would reminisce about that fateful morning when Isabel whispered desperately, "Doctor, don't drink that coffee." The head doctor put something in it. It was hard to imagine that those words would be the starting point for a series of events that would change many lives in the hospital. Isabel admitted that at first, she had just acted on impulse, unable to allow a good person to suffer. Diego said he would never forget how she saved his life. That situation had brought them closer in a very important way, and their ability to show humanity, care for others, and value truth and justice. Of course, not everything became perfect. Problems remained within the healthcare system, and you never know if a new head doctor would emerge, trying to enrich himself through illegal methods. But the people in the hospital understood that you couldn't remain silent when you saw injustice. Sometimes, one timely voice, "Doctor, don't drink that coffee," can save not just one life, but entire institutions from corrupt schemes. And so, the story of the poisoned cup, of corruption, and of the bravery of those who dared to say no, came to an end. And no mysticism, it all boils down to human greed and power pushing someone to commit a crime, but courage and conscience stopping it. Since then, the coffee machines in the hospital cafeteria started bubbling again, and the aroma of fresh coffee delighted the tired doctors. But neither Diego nor Isabel took a cup without checking if everything was okay this time. Although now, they had no doubt that no one would dare repeat such villainy. The doctors drank their coffee with relief, knowing that the greatest danger had passed, and the memory of what happened remained a reminder that we must always stand by the truth, even when it's scary and dangerous. When a patient Diego operated on that day came back for a checkup, she asked, "Doctor, what happened to you?" I heard there were some troubles in the hospital. He smiled and replied evasively. A little management mishap, we've sorted it out. The important thing is, how's your health? The patient smiled gratefully. Everything's fine. Thank you for saving me that time. Diego thought that maybe this work really is one of the most important in the world. Saving lives not just in the operating room, but also protecting people around you when danger looms. And Isabel, while rummaging through the cabinet, found an old spoon there, the one the head doctor used to stir his coffee, and felt a strange sense of relief. Well, here's just an ordinary spoon, but look at how much trouble it could have symbolized if I hadn't warned in time. Since then, she carried with her a piece of confidence. It's important to tell the truth when you see a lie. It may be scary, it may be risky, but otherwise, the world will keep rolling into the abyss of corruption and cruelty. So now, every morning, when she arrived for her shift, she looked at her colleagues and felt they were a little closer, a little warmer toward each other. Because when a hospital goes through such a shakeup and comes out stronger, it means the people are ready to change. And they did change. Diego and Isabel, after everything that happened, became not just colleagues, but people who trusted each other completely. No one in the department was surprised when, a year later, they announced their engagement. However, that's another story, unrelated to the cup of coffee, but directly related to how sometimes terrifying events lead to happy outcomes. If it hadn't been for that fateful situation, who knows if they would have grown so close. Life has a way of creating the most surprising chains of events. And as for the head doctor, well, his fate was decided by the law. They say he continued to claim until the end that it was all a setup, that he was a victim of a conspiracy. But the evidence and witness testimonies were irrefutable. No one had expected that someone with such a reputation would commit such a serious crime, but unfortunately, greed and the fear of exposure can break even those with a pristine white coat. So, one warned cup of coffee not only saved a surgeon's life but also helped bring to light schemes that could have cost the budget and, ultimately, the patients, a great deal of loss. One small gesture, one call to conscience, and in the end, justice prevailed. Even if it wasn't immediate, even with immense risk, but in the end, good triumphed over evil. In the hospital corridors, they still occasionally whisper the legend of how the orderly bravely rushed to defend the doctor, and he thanked her not only with friendship but with strong support, becoming her closest person. And every time new batches of coffee are brought to the cafeteria, someone jokes, asking whether something was added to it. And everyone laughs, though the laughter is half bittersweet from the memories. But then they drink their coffee and say, "Now everything is fine, because we have honest colleagues who are ready to stop evil in time." This is how logic and courage overcame greed and cunning. And it all started with a simple but persistent phrase, "Doctor, don't drink that coffee." The head doctor put something in it.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.